Malaysia's digital journey began more than 2 decades ago when MSC Malaysia was set up to transform the country into a knowledge-based economy. Since then, MSC Malaysia has contributed immensely towards the growth of the nation's digital economy. Our next step is to take the digital transformation from the corridor to the world. Introducing Malaysia Digital, a strategic initiative which will empower the rakyat, businesses and foreign investments. Malaysia Digital will also elevate the participation of Malaysians and local businesses in revolutionizing the world's digital economy. Malaysia Digital opens doors for Malaysians by providing equitable access to digital tools, knowledge and income opportunities. It offers new business opportunities and growth through a supportive digital ecosystem. It also provides flexible and agile investment facilitation to make the country investment friendly. The goal is to drive the digital ecosystem and develop the digital economy to a stage where it contributes at least 25.5% of our GDP and creates 500,000 jobs by 2025.
Malaysia Digital will galvanize public-private partnerships to accelerate the growth of our digital economy and drive positive transformation that ultimately benefit the rakyat, businesses, investors, and also the whole nation.
Establishing Malaysia into a digital nation, one with more adept, stronger and resilient economy, society and governance. Stepping into tomorrow's digital future today.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam perpaduan, salam Malaysia Madani. I'm pleased to share a groundbreaking initiative that is shaping the future of our nation, the National Data Sharing Policy or NDSP. In 2022, the government launched the NDSP, a visionary policy that transcends boundaries, encompassing the public sector, the private sector and the rakyat. This policy holds the key to fostering a data sharing environment that is not only conducive but transformative. It aims to unleash the true potential of data, improve the quality and transparency of service delivery, stimulate innovation, and drive economic growth through data-driven solutions. The formulation of NDSP envisions a nation where data knows no bounds, where its accessibility and usability are at the core of our digital landscape. By actively engaging in this endeavor, we are laying a strong foundation for the next evolution of our digital ecosystem. We're embarking on a journey to build a stronger and more secure digital foundation for Malaysia. It is the keystone of our digital transformation agenda, empowering us to become a more inclusive, resilient, sustainable, and forward-thinking nation. Embracing responsible and ethical data sharing will unlock significant value for our society and economy, enhancing our competitiveness on the global stage. I encourage all of you to support this policy and explore the vast opportunities that data sharing presents. To raise awareness and gather valuable feedback, we have initiated the NDSP series, a collaborative effort by the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation or MDEC, Malaysia Kini, and Digital News Asia or DNA, with the support of the Ministry of Communications and Digital. This series aims to educate the public about the benefits and challenges of data sharing, while gathering opinions and suggestions to enhance the policy and its implementation. Your active participation in these discussions will be instrumental in shaping the data sharing practices in Malaysia, leading us towards a secure and dynamic digital world. and let us embark on this remarkable journey together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our 9-part series on the National Data Sharing Policy. And I think it was, thank you all for the privilege of your time, right, for joining us today. And for those of you who've been, who have checked out maybe some of the earlier series, you would know that we have actually structured the 9 episodes into targeting 3 stakeholder groups, right? Government, rakyat, and business. So today's topic on public-private partnerships actually encompasses all 3 stakeholder groups. And if you're also wondering, hey, you normally, DNA and Malaysia Kini normally bring 2 or 3 panelists, and have them talk about issues and answer our questions. Today, there's only one. Well, the reason is because some of you who follow Parliament will know that today is the last day of this current Parliament sitting, and we lost a very good professional who was supposed to join us, and because he's supporting one of the ministers, in answering questions and dealing with issues in Parliament. So he couldn't join. And we had another person who's the head of data practices for one of the largest legal firms in the country, also couldn't join because of some issue that came up. So hence we had only one. When I say only, that's being unfair to Ivan, who I'll introduce shortly. But then when we looked at the profile and the experience, the global experience that Ivan has, we said that, hey, Ivan has got a lot of exposure and awareness and interaction in this space. Let's change our format and maybe just have him come and do a fireside chat with me. And when I introduce Ivan, I'm going to start by actually having him explain his background and what his company is doing. And then you'll understand why, we're doing this different format with Ivan as our guest of honor, right? Or Ivan in the hot seat, so to speak. So with that, then we'll get started. And thank you by the way, so many of you have put in so many questions, and Ivan was going, wait, how many people are attending? Right? There's so many questions here. And we know that many of you who are attending are going to start asking your own questions. We totally support and encourage you to get your questions coming in first. But now let's introduce Ivan Mortimer, right, who is with a company called DataSwift. And I'm going to let Ivan introduce what DataSwift does and his own background as well. Ivan, thank you very much for joining us and for being brave enough to being the sole panelist right here. Ivan was a bit nervous. Hey, wait a minute. Could you maybe get someone else to join me and we can interact? I said, Ivan, we think, what you have, your exposure, and you just being in Asia for a long time until just recently makes you eminently suitable. So we managed to convince him to join us. So Ivan, the screen is yours.
Okay, well, it's very kind. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a very important program for Malaysia and other countries. And so I'm very happy to try and share my experience in this domain. So as you mentioned, I'm an advisor to a company called DataSwift, which originated out of a joint university program in the United Kingdom, bringing together several departments working on the structure of the data economy and how to, in a way, in many people's eyes, fix the internet, which is a big task, but fix it in the sense of trying to bring back much more both, social, economic, and operational control to end users, to you and me and the rest of the populations over their own data. And there is a lot, the last few years have seen many different types of initiatives and debates about how to create more vibrant, open, but also fair and secure data ecosystems for the digital economy. DataSwift is a company which takes a particular approach to that, which I'll illustrate in more examples as we go through, but which came to my attention when I was working up until very, very recently, as you mentioned, based out of Southeast Asia for the International Finance Corporation, which is a part of the World Bank Group. And I'd been working for about 12 years there in the region, mostly on financial sector development and the transformation of the digital economy in that context. But over the last 3 to 4 years, in particular, with a boost through COVID, you might say, a whole range of issues have come to light and intensify the need to find more efficient ways to really reach the objectives that are outlined in your series and were outlined in the sort of mission of MDEC and the government to create a more vibrant ecosystem for data sharing. So I'm really happy to join this session, and I already went through the questions, and we'll try to give some insights and experience where possible.
Possible. Okay. So look, we'll and I think what Ivan has done very well also is has clustered some of the questions, right? People sometimes, of course, nobody knows what question the other person is asking. So there means some overlap similarities, or he has taken some liberty to say, I think this person actually means this. So now with that, now I'm going to start with the first question, right? Which is that there are obviously different areas of the data economy development, and different issues that they also raise, Ivan, right? So talking about the role of government versus industry versus personal data networks even. So do you want to just take a stab of that? Let's take a stab in that.
Yeah, so I think one place often to start is to recognize that the government has to wear multiple hats in this agenda. There are some in the way that the world is organized today with nation states and international collaboration. The first thing is that in order to interact really in the data economy, an important factor is trust. How do I trust the data I'm receiving or that I have access to, that it really corresponds to a particular person or that it hasn't been tampered with, whether it's for a natural person or a legal person? And so just like we have in the offline world, in the physical world, we have things like ID cards and passports and addresses and things like that. Government plays a crucial role in setting both the legal framework, but also some of the technical services for providing digital equivalents of identity, of addresses, of social security records. So the government itself is kind of going through, in most countries, a transformation of making those what we call in the industry artifacts, data artifacts, not just digital, but also digital in a manner where they can be shared, transformed, and where the authentication and integrity of these data elements can be preserved. So that's one area. Then, of course, another big topic, which is really core to governments, is also transforming the way they design, deliver various public services and public functions. Everything from how they collect statistics and report them, to maybe how they optimize traffic flow, to public services and education, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another area where data takes on a different role, and the government plays a role of managing data for the purposes of really optimizing the way they deliver their mandate. And the third area, which is much more vast and really is the topic of your title here, is how the government sets the right foundations, both technical, legal, institutional, so that the society at large, whether it be through communities, through businesses, through other kinds of endeavors, also have the right tools at their disposal to create and promote data as not just an economic means, but also as just simply something that needs to be managed carefully within society to continue to participate in society as we go through this digital transformation. So those are three main elements, I would say, that come up in this context.
Okay. I think there were just so many questions around trust, right? And somebody even one of the questions was even like, hey, how can we trust corrupt politicians? So I said, oh wow, okay, man, he's really going straight for the jugular there, right? But I guess but overall, it seems there is just skepticism or very little trust in government. And I think I saw a data point to say that in the US, only 29% of the population trust the government. So even in a very robust and mature democracy, trust is so low. So I think, government and private sector, right? They've got their work cut out for themselves in trying to create, partnerships with people like us who are the providers of the data through our daily interactions in life, right? In making us, reassuring us that it is being done ethically, like the minister was saying, right? They want to make sure that data is used in an ethical manner, in win-win. And he also said that, he wanted us, right, all of us to participate in the discussion of this, our national data sharing policy too. So they always tend to say the right things, but I think it's for us, the public, to participate, right, actively.
Yeah, so that's an extremely hot topic, important, is how do we build trust? And what do we mean by trust in this broader context? And again, going back to these different areas that I was outlining,
yep,
I would highlight a few different issues. So at the most basic level, and I'm not a technician, so I won't go into the details, but at the most basic level, of course, where there are lots of developments internationally is in cryptography, the technical mechanisms to secure data, when we use hashes and QR codes and encryption, etc. There are, increasingly new standards, also new threats in that area. And so there's obviously a role for governments, not just domestically, but especially internationally, to play in facilitating those developments, staying up to date with them so that they can address both the risks and use up-to-date technologies. But I think more for the context of this session, I would highlight two other areas. So one is there's a question of setting rules or guidelines or standards and putting in place the right mechanisms to supervise or control respect of those rules. And that's still a very much a moving target, both within the public and the private sector. There are now a whole range of very well-developed, but mostly high-level principles around data governance standards. So people can refer to, for example, the OECD. Not all that long ago, the person who's in charge of this area, the OECD, was based in Singapore at the Asia Law Society, where she led some endeavors to at least, first of all, compare and contrast different rules and guidelines within Southeast Asia. And then, of course, there are, at a more technical level, people can refer to multiple standards, often endorsed or enshrined in ISO standards for various elements of technology security. But the broader question, and this is the last point on this, is that what's also happening is there's a movement towards what people call architectures that support zero trust environments.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, to try and put in place what might be described as techno-legal structures. In other words, a combination of technology which also is embedded with legal structures that actually minimizes the amount of data or the kind of data that's exposed. So an example would be, we frequently use in many discussions is, and apologies, it comes from the US, is if I'm going into a shop to buy alcohol as a young person, then it's a legal obligation to check somebody's age.
Yep.
And what happens today is somebody will take their driver's license in the US and they will present it. And that will be the means to verify whether the person is above or below the age in question. But of course, you could imagine, and it already exists today, a digital mechanism where the only thing that is shared is not the birth date, not the exact age, but just verifying whether that person is or is not above a certain age and using machine-readable trusted data. So they're privacy-enhancing or technologies, we call them PETs, that are kind of emblematic of a broader movement towards minimizing data exposure and data control in a way that also addresses these things. So you can kind of pull on these different levers to address the trust issue.
Okay. I think there was, when the last time, Ivan, we had a session last week, actually, right? Episode 6. After that, somebody came up and said that, hey, in Singapore, I think DBS Bank was just issued a fine and a warning also that if they violate, the data policy again, they will not be allowed to use their data for a period of time, right? And that's a hefty, potential penalty. And he said that, why can't Malaysia do that too? Because over here, a lot of us people are cynical that, we've got all the best laws and regulations. We've got our Personal Data Protection Act, right? From like 2009 or 2010. But and actually they're in the process of updating it now and reintroducing it again. But it's never enforced. So there's that cynicism and skepticism there. So people want to see that the big companies are wrapped, right, and severely. And that will in a way then translate to us having a bit more trust that, okay, I can still share my data and I know that government is watching on my behalf, right? And making sure that, bad actors are going to happen in here, but they eventually get wrapped, right?
Yes, I mean, you're highlighting, I think, one of the most complicated but important areas, which is really, on the one hand, we can see various kinds of data fraud, data breaches happening. Anecdotally, I would say more and more frequently, although it's very difficult to know whether it's happening more frequently
exactly.
or whether we're just simply becoming more aware of them. And many of these things happen through the downloading of apps, or as well as that are at a quite small scale. They can happen in a cross-border context. So, again, it comes back to your title, public-private.
Yeah.
Just thinking about the technical, organizational, also the legal mechanisms to monitor, to communicate to the population even what they should be looking out for, what behavior they can avoid, I think that is really at the core of where we're all struggling at the moment internationally as to how to arrange more secure, more efficient mechanisms.
Okay.
And we can talk about some examples.
I know, from reading, I see many countries are struggling with that, right? But I think citizens playing a bigger role, businesses playing a bigger role is absolute key factor there, especially citizens, right? Because we're the ones who end up we are the harvestee, right? We're being harvested all the time. So, and I think it's beginning to happen, but it has to, we're probably in first gear, right? We really got to get it going and ramp it up further. But talking about this, look, there's quite a lot of questions, and I think I want to get to the second questions, right, that you had. And among them who wanted to ask this was, I think, let me see, Elia. She's one of the many who asked questions around this, which is, right, what has been the experience, right, of governments delivering public services with access to data? And this is probably asking you for examples from around the world.
Sure. Yeah, that's it's a complicated topic. I would start with saying that there are a couple of countries that have made very kind of coherent and large-scale attempts to digitize basically their government. And the most extreme example that people often refer to is Estonia. Okay. Estonia actually has gone through a process of enabling basically all of their government functions to function digitally and remotely.
Wow.
And started then even to, in effect, export some of their experience and technology to other countries to really digitize that whole range of not just land registers and passport issuance but also other processes. So you can even now, within the European Union at least, for example, if you're a company, you can register as a company in Estonia without ever setting foot physically in Estonia.
Wow.
So then you have other governments like in India, where it's actually through a very subtle sort of collaboration, endorsement, but not ownership of public infrastructure is often referred to as India Stack. They're part of the digital economy program of India, which have brought massive benefits and visible changes through the identity program called Aadhaar, through the payment system called UPI, and they're now moving further down that sort of development towards also helping merchants, for example, on e-commerce platforms to take more control over their own data that may often be locked up in some people's minds on proprietary platforms, and using that to help them improve the way they access finance, for example. So India is another very prominent example. And then I would say that there are much more small scale and still complicated examples that are often very sector specific, around maybe digital delivery of healthcare and using data in the healthcare industry to better detect illnesses, or in agriculture. But many of those, partly because they are more complicated from a kind of public policy and private collaboration perspective, have scaled less prominently than some of those examples I just gave you from India and Estonia.
Okay. The thing is, just listening to you, there are so many anecdotes and examples, that come, that when you're talking, that trigger me to want to jump in, but I just, let Ivan talk and share. But I think I think the India example is interesting, right? What they have done, and they've done it really hard and fast. But I think even when you talk about India example, and even Malaysia, the issue people have is that government cleverly exempts itself from the rules that it makes, right, for everyone else to apply. And that's a big issue with people. You don't even have to have libertarian views to say, hey, man, there's something I don't like about that. And I guess if you interact with governments, why do some of them want to do that, right? Like have that ultimate, kill switch or control?
So this is a much more, political issue. I think, at the very macro level, there are different streams of thought that run into answering your question, I think. So when we talk about data, there are, and I'm characterizing very, very broadly, there are, in some jurisdictions, the priority has been preserving the privacy and protecting the data of individuals. So, for example, if we look at European legislation, that is really one of the primary drivers behind GDPR and many other initiatives, because that is the political mandate.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, most European governments, I would say, are probably going to, people are going to have more trust in many European governments than they might do in other markets that I've worked in, in other parts of the world. And it's sort of complementary. They're trying to create structures that will build that trust. In other markets, that's less of a concern. The concern is more actually about data empowerment. How do I, as a small business or an individual, actually, how can I use my data to do things that are important to me? And secondly, maybe then the privacy and issue is. And I think it's in those contexts, that governments may be less under pressure from the population to address the issues you've raised. And then there are markets, for example, one market that stands out very clearly in the policy domain on this is Australia, where Australia said very clearly, we want to enable data sharing and data usage across the economy as an economic policy. Because we see it as a national asset. And in a way, that's also reflected in the statements made in Malaysia and very clearly in some of the approach taken by Singapore and other markets like that. I think that the main thing that, and maybe we'll get into this later, the issue is really, how do you achieve those different objectives while still trying to minimize, going back to the original question, the potential for misuse, whether it be by criminals or by government itself or other parties. And that's where the real innovation, both from a governance perspective and a technical perspective, is really happening today.
Yeah, okay. And I think the good thing I see in Malaysia, the public has got a strong voice through social media, Ivan, and I'm sure it's the case in many countries, right? Because and definitely our politicians are very sensitive to raising the ire of social media, right, of netizens. So in that sense, that's good. But again, you got to participate in the process. So I think there were actually one or two questions about from people who were saying that, hey, we talk about public-private partnership, and they're saying that the partnerships are inherently unequal, right? Because big business platforms, right, they take your data, one off when you sign the privacy agreement, and then it's like, they can do anything and everything they can with it. So how do you try to claim back some of the control and power? And I think I listened to a webinar on this organized by a UK global publication, and there's one question from someone who said that, how can I then benefit from the data that I know the big platforms are benefiting from, right? Because how can I make money from it? And then they tend to say, the platform to say that, hey, because we have your data, we actually be able to deliver you the best deals at the best price possible. It's like, take it or leave it, trust us, right? We're saying we're giving you value in this way. But some people are now saying that how can you really, benefit from your own the monetization of your data? So, but it's still an unequal and tiny voices, saying this, and the big platforms still get away with it. And just very quickly, when you talk about big platforms, I wanted to access, I had a X-ray done, right? And I was told that if I downloaded the app from this medical center, I would be able to access the X-ray on the app. And I say, wow, hey, that's great, man. Why didn't anyone tell me about it? Oh, in that physical form you first signed is somewhere in the fine print. I say, oh, good Lord, who's going to read the fine print down there at the very bottom, right? I say, okay. And then I downloaded the app, and because of this series, right? So I'm reading the privacy statement now, and I'm reading it, and I as you go down, it's like they're repeating something they said earlier, but the language was changed slightly to say that you are now I'm allowing them to share my data with their suppliers and all that. Where earlier it said they cannot, and I'm saying, hey, what the hell is going on? But it's like you come down to like page 8 or 9. And I gave up. I said, no way, man. I forgot about downloading the app. I deleted it, because and recently I tried to do again another, download another app, and I wanted to get a report from someone. And again, if you keep reading down, they just try to catch you, like the insidious language is further down, where it kind of oversees, what they say earlier. And literally you feel that you're just signing away your data, right? So it's very frustrating when you see this happening, and again, like some people say, who's on our side, right?
Yeah. So I mean, this is, again, I think there are different approaches emerging around the world to address what you've just raised. So one area which is very prominent now is attempts by competition authorities to more tightly regulate at least some of those larger actors that you're referring to, and putting in place not just stricter, but slightly differently designed rules and requirements that help to contest their market power and regulate the market power where it already exists. So, for example, in the European Union, there's a new sort of body of legislation and regulation that targets what they call digital gatekeepers. So large enterprises, again, I don't want to name any specific ones, but you know the kind of enterprise we're talking about, where you kind of are forced to go, just like you said, down that list of terms and conditions. And if you don't accept them, then you're excluded from major parts of the economy. It's a take it or leave it phenomenon. And so that's one kind of direction of travel that many countries now take, is to see how to do that. I wouldn't call it the alternative, but a complementary approach, which I think you were kind of alluding to in the UK. In the UK, indeed, there's a new piece of legislation still being processed called the Data Act, which is also trying to, make some of the theoretical obligations that these big tech platforms, as well as other companies, have to give you access to your data, make that actually much more operationally and commercially viable. And this is where DataSwift actually plays a role, is in providing a decentralized infrastructure through which individuals can have their own sort of remote cloud-based mini server, which is legally, economically, and operationally their own.
Wow.
And so that they then actually are the custodians of their own data, and are then able to make much more direct decisions about, well, this medical service provider wants my data about my X-ray. Okay, do I want to give them to it? And if so, on what conditions? And this is sort of what people often refer to as self-sovereign data, or self-sovereign architectures, where instead of all the data being sitting on one of those big tech platforms, anecdotally, it's restituted. Just like if I have a piece of paper today with my information, I can give it to anybody I like, but I can do that in a digital world only if I have other tools and mechanisms. So that's that's a key area where there's debate going on behind the scenes between different sort of approaches. And I think it's still very early stages, but
okay, yeah, oh, definitely very early stages, yeah. Okay.
And then the last point, just sorry, and this kind of relates to what's going on in Malaysia also and other markets around open banking, is the third approach is to introduce a new category of regulated institutions, which are effectively data intermediaries.
Oh, okay.
So that you say, okay, I can't control my data myself, but at least I can assign a type of institution which has been vetted by the government, by whether it be in the context of financial services or something else, to control access to and control the sharing of my data, and to connect with some of those big tech platforms as well as me. And that's a more common approach that many governments are taking, but also brings with it complications of having to then set out new licensing supervision frameworks for a whole class of institutions that don't really exist today in the mature sense of the word.
I mean, but this is the experimentation, right? Like you say, it's all still new. Like I say, in the UK now, right? They're still trying to refine and finesse that policy, and and even if you listen to the minister's opening remarks, right, at the end, he's inviting everyone, right, to participate, right, in our national data sharing policy, because it's not gazetted as a law yet. In fact, I know the consultants they've employed to put it down into the legal language and to create the act, right, the proposed act, and it's going to go before all our members of parliaments, and all of us still have a role to play. If some of you are anxious or not happy about it, you can go and download the act. Although right now it's in Bahasa Malaysia, the national language. You can download the act and read it, and you can submit your concerns, right, through your resident association even, right, or to a particular group, and as an individual to your member of parliament, say you're going to be debating this at some point next year. These are issues I'm concerned about. Can you raise this for me? Right? But the key thing is to be part of the process, be involved, right? Be involved. Very important. So let me just move on to some other questions that you have, right, Ivan? And I think you had some things around what are some of the principles and practices, right, surrounding data protection, privacy, and commercial use also. You want to get into this a little bit? You're kind of jumped in and out of this also, but this is a specific cluster of questions around this area.
Yeah, around some of the operational rules and guidance, you mean? Yeah. So I think this is probably more practical and of interest to a lot of the audience.
Yep.
And it depends an awful lot where in this ecosystem you're playing a role. But where shall I start? I think that anybody who wants to read up on some of the basics certainly can go to a variety of international as well and also domestic institutions, of course, but in other markets for principles of data ethics, okay, ISO standards on controlling for cybersecurity risks. Most markets now have or will soon have some form of Data Privacy Act or Data Protection Act, which are oriented towards consumers. And that's always a very good starting point. In Southeast Asia, what's interesting, and I can provide some links to this later on if you like, as I said, there was a very interesting study done by the Asia Law Society comparing the different data protection acts across the Asia-Pac region. Really also as a precursor to increased efforts between governments, both bilaterally and multilaterally, to see how to ease data flows while still preserving while still preserving these rights enshrined in Data Protection and Privacy Act. So I think that's a really important and interesting area for your audience to look at. Of course, that doesn't cover quite as much is how that relates to corporates, because in Data Privacy and Protection Acts, really the focus is natural persons as opposed to legal persons.
Oh, okay.
However, when you start to unpick how businesses work, it's often very difficult to disassociate data about natural persons from their role as customers or providers of legal persons. So this is an area which is beginning to get addressed. a little bit more, but also through trade policy documents. So that might be, again, interesting area where there's some links. The other thing that might be interesting, particularly for those involved in a specific sector, like I think the main ones where there's much more advanced sector-specific guidance are around finance, of course. So
of course,
open banking has much more developed rules now, down to level of standardization of what kind of data and sharing. But also in domains like healthcare and agriculture, there's a recognition that there's much, much more potential efficiency gains that can be reaped from having better data ecosystems. And there, both from the private sector and through multilateral organizations, there are also good, I would call them, there's a range of studies, let's say, discussion documents and principles. And then last but not least, of course, in this week, it's very prominent, of course, in the whole environmental area, when it comes to fulfilling reporting requirements for ESG. There's a whole other body of work going on to try and figure out how do we not just get companies to report what they think they have produced in terms of carbon emissions, but how do we build trust in that system? And how do we build trust in that system so that some of the obligations and attempts at green finance can be underpinned by verifiable data? So very quickly, you get into these very domain sector specific areas when you're looking for guidance, depending on what kind of activities you're undertaking.
So, if you go into, you bring in ESG or green finance, you're right. Yeah, you almost got to go very vertical and specialized, right? So, and make it more targeted and more meaningful then also.
And an example that came up in some of DataSwift's discussions in Malaysia is very, it gives a good illustration. There were discussions about how to work with the authority covering the national roads, highways, and where they have data on how much large vehicles are using those routes, how many, how tagging vehicles in many markets in Southeast Asia now, most of the logistics vehicles are tagged for purposes of payments and geo tracking for tolls. There's a lot of data there, as you can probably imagine, which is both public and private, about where vehicles are going, how many miles they're driving, what's their fuel efficiency, which routes, how much, and indirectly, therefore, how much pollution are they creating? And governments would quite like to have that data to be able to optimize through different policies the total carbon emissions of the country. So that's an interesting example where a more vibrant data ecosystem between public and private actors could actually have real results in meeting some of those environmental targets we have.
Okay. Oh, good. Thanks. Look, we're already at like the 45-minute mark and there's so many questions coming in, right? So I think there was one actually question. Let me get to one from an anonymous attendee, but and then I think Nick Zafri is joined and he has actually given some interesting, not questions, but just opinions, right, that you can read. But I want to just ask this person who said that for effective public-private data partnerships, policy and enforcement is crucial, right? Could you give case study examples, right, that Malaysia can learn from? I know you mentioned Australia, there's something, but I think before this we were talking, right? Audience always wants something tangible that somebody's doing right or they did wrong that we can learn from. So, and maybe if there's a ready link, right, that you can share, right? You can share with people, or you want to just talk about this now quickly for this person.
So. This might, again, obviously a personal view, but one of the most, I look at this through the lens of international collaboration.
International, okay.
In the sense that the data economy and the digital economy is basically ignores borders as much as it can.
Okay, interesting.
The world, it's making the world a much smaller place, and disproportionately digital trade and commerce happens across borders rather than within borders. Again, just in terms of the trends we're seeing, it's a way to enhance collaboration. And so what that raises as a question is, how do we not just think about public-private arrangements at a national level, but how do we already on day one think about public-private arrangements that encourage and facilitate international data transfers and management, rather than building national silos, which we then have to spend years and years trying to integrate.
Yeah.
So in that context, I think one of the most interesting examples I can refer your audience to is an organization which was developed really for the financial industry. It's called GLIFE, the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. One of the problems in this domain is we get very long acronyms and names that are very complicated.
Correct.
But the principle behind this was to try and provide a structure through which the legal registration numbers that companies receive on a national basis to conduct business. So you need, you need a tax number or something like that. Every jurisdiction has their own structures and etc. But if you're doing international business and you need to comply with financial law to verify who you're sending money with, who you're doing business with, and check against various, due diligence criteria, KYC, sanctions lists, etc., that becomes very, very complicated and operationally very costly. So this system was put in place to build on top of these national structures, but still preserve trust in a digital ID for companies that could be used across all jurisdictions. And they've now transformed that into what we call a verifiable credential. So that in the Web3 distributed world, I can share information about my company and have it verified through basically an open distributed ledger type ecosystem. Going back to your original question, I know this is a bit long. The interesting thing about this is everybody wanted to have a system whereby even outside a given national jurisdiction, people would trust the origin, the provenance of this data. That's crucial. And the question is, how do you do that in an environment where you don't have a national authority? How do you do it in a way which is not pinned to a particular government or international organization? And they did that by building on national legislation, but creating a foundation managed by industry players. From across the world, different industry, different independent directors, but they also put in place, with the support of the Financial Stability Board in Basel, where I am today, of a so-called regulatory oversight committee. And that regulatory oversight committee doesn't provide a guarantee, but being composed of representatives of finance ministries and central banks of 30 or 40 countries around the world, there is direct oversight over the framework to provide integrity and trust, but it's still a kind of anchor for corporate identity on which corporations around the world can build up infrastructure which is decentralized, trusted data, and to which they can start then to use to attach other data attributes from other sources. So it's a really quite unique example of public-private partnership at an international scale.
Yeah, I was going to say, the scale of this is impressive, man. Shows how much value people see you can extract when you get this right.
That's right. And I think if people were to look at an example, and it's active in Southeast Asia.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's very much active there in the region. It would be a good example to look at when you're thinking about some of the problems, but also some of the unique solutions out there for international collaboration in the data economy.
All right, good. Look, I'm just one comment from Nick I want to read out, and then I've got a final question, right, that we already have, which is, I think Nick actually is making the point that he thinks it's important, right, Ivan, to have an organization that promotes civic society data awareness, right, and not maybe come from government, almost like an NGO, right? And then because NGOs play an important role, in various countries, right? Promoting the agendas they are promoting, right? Defending the rights, creating awareness, or pushing for more enlightened or up-to-date policy. So he was saying that I think having such an organization would play a critical role in fostering responsible data practices. And he says, I noticed that the most important is education and advocacy, raise awareness, right? And only then can you focus on policy and regulation monitoring, community engagement, etc. So thank you. He's put a whole bunch of other observations there. But Nick, thank you so much for your engagement in our conversation here. Right, appreciate that. I think I just want to move on now to the last question we have, because we're already at we're going to keep this short to 45 minutes, but we've run a bit over. But I think people are still with us, and that was that. I want to talk about what do you think, Nick, are some of the developments on the horizon? Although honestly speaking, we are still very early in the game here. But what are some developments you see on the horizon, and what do those developments mean, right, for the space of data sharing and trying to create win-win situation for all parties concerned?
So from my perspective, I think that there are two elements to what we'll see come out. One is that there's a proliferation in what we call digital IDs, basically, in various forms, whether it be things like Aadhaar or the ID wallet in the European Union. But today I might use my email address, for example, as my identifier, and I link that to all sorts of verifications to be able to do something in the internet. Increasingly, governments, and to a certain extent private sector institutions as well, are trying to create alternatives that are fit for purpose for both individuals and, given the example of Glyph, for corporates, to independently verify who they are online without being locked into a specific platform like Apple or Google or the equivalent. And once that trusted anchor of identity becomes more readily accepted and available, people will be able to then more readily attach other data to it and then share that data in a way where people know it's been stamped as this came from so-and-so. So I think that will gradually have an impact into what we should see, in terms of developments, not just nationally, but internationally. The second element, I think, which is appearing, is there's a notion that to create interoperability between different types of data and platforms, we need to think about new protocols.
Oh, okay, really? Yeah.
So in the old world, we might have thought about harmonizing software across borders and creating links, which is very, very costly and difficult to maintain. But when we think about just what we're doing right now, we're using technical protocols like HTML or TCP/IP that are very prevalent in the world.
Yes.
And it's not particularly difficult to get different systems to work together using these protocols. And that logic seems to be feeding into a lot of debate I've been seeing over the last year or so about how to securely control peer-to-peer data exchange in a way which is both interoperable, but not dependent on everybody adopting the same system. I think that's another trend where we'll see, kind of enshrined in this broader debate, which came out in the G20 report a couple of months ago now, of digital public infrastructure, which is a very hotly debated term, you might say.
Okay.
But I think in combination with that prominence that the G20 has given to the notion of digital public infrastructure, these protocols on the one hand and the role of IDs will be, important factors in how the ecosystems and issues that you're relating to will evolve in the next few years.
Okay, all right. I think evolve is a key word, right? It's going to keep evolving, but again, right, like Minister Fahmi says, all of us got to play a role in shaping it and evolving it, right? So there's still a lot more to go. And one interesting thing, Ivan, when we've had two physical sessions which have been hybrid, physical and online, and 5 online. And the physical sessions, people have actually come up and say, hey, I hope we keep having this conversation, because it's a conversation that you need to keep having, right? To raise it up in the public consciousness too. So, and I'm sure that, and I think, Nick again has put good job for MDEC Malaysia Kini, yep. And I think we definitely need to carry on this series next year, right? And keep talking about the issues. And sometimes I know some panelists will say, hey, Karam, some people are still asking hygiene level questions. Is my data secure? Is it safe? And I say, yeah, because these are very intimate and personal issues, right? You all have examples of someone who's been hurt because their data was exposed, or they downloaded the wrong app and they lost money, which, by the way, happened at the last physical event. A gentleman, said that he lost like literally about 10,000 euro, right? Because the money is going out from his bank, and he told his bank, hey, this is what's going on, and the bank still didn't lock his account. And he said, who's there to protect you when you alert them that you're being violated, right? And just so many things still going on. But I love the fact that we're having this conversation, and we have almost 100 people still here on ostensibly a topic that can be a bit dry for most people, but I think it's coming into the consciousness, right? The mainstream. And I just love it. Thank you all, so much for joining us and being part of this conversation. And do share the recording of this with your friends, because it's going to stay on in perpetuity, right? In the digital platforms out there. And Ivan, when you come to KL next time, we'll probably have a physical, right, teh tarik session with you also. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And with that, all of you, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you for the last 2 sessions, which will be hybrid sessions, right? You can physically come and join us. Thank you all so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam perpaduan, salam Malaysia Madani. I'm pleased to share a groundbreaking initiative that is shaping the future of our nation, the National Data Sharing Policy, or NDSP. In 2022, the government launched the NDSP, a visionary policy that transcends boundaries, encompassing the public sector, the private sector, and the rakyat. This policy holds the key to fostering a data sharing environment that is not only conducive, but transformative. It aims to unleash the true potential of data, improve the quality and transparency of service delivery, stimulate innovation, and drive economic growth through data-driven solutions. The formulation of NDSP envisions a nation where data knows no bounds, where its accessibility and usability are at the core of our digital landscape. By actively engaging in this endeavor, we are laying a strong foundation for the next evolution of our digital ecosystem. We're embarking on a journey to build a stronger and more secure digital foundation for Malaysia. It is the keystone of our digital transformation agenda, empowering us to become a more inclusive, resilient, sustainable, and forward-thinking nation. Embracing responsible and ethical data sharing will unlock significant value for our society and economy, enhancing our competitiveness on the global stage. I encourage all of you to support this policy and explore the vast opportunities that data sharing presents. To raise awareness and gather valuable feedback, we have initiated the NDSP series, a collaborative effort by the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, or MDEC, Malaysia Kini, and Digital News Asia, or DNA, with the support of the Ministry of Communications and Digital. This series aims to educate the public about the benefits and challenges of data sharing, while gathering opinions and suggestions to enhance the policy and its implementation. Your active participation in these discussions will be instrumental in shaping the data sharing practices in Malaysia, leading us towards a secure and dynamic digital world. And let us embark on this remarkable journey together.
Malaysia's digital journey began more than 2 decades ago when MSC Malaysia was set up to transform the country into a knowledge-based economy. Since then, MSC Malaysia has contributed immensely towards the growth of the nation's digital economy. Our next step is to take the digital transformation from the corridor to the world. Introducing Malaysia Digital, a strategic initiative which will empower the rakyat, businesses and foreign investments. Malaysia Digital will also elevate the participation of Malaysians and local businesses in revolutionizing the world's digital economy. Malaysia Digital opens doors for Malaysians by providing equitable access to digital tools, knowledge and income opportunities. It offers new business opportunities and growth through a supportive digital ecosystem. It also provides flexible and agile investment facilitation to make the country investment friendly. The goal is to drive the digital ecosystem and develop the digital economy to a stage where it contributes at least 25.5% of our GDP and creates 500,000 jobs by 2025.
Malaysia Digital will galvanize public-private partnerships to accelerate the growth of our digital economy and drive positive transformation that ultimately benefit the rakyat, businesses, investors, and also the whole nation.
Establishing Malaysia into a digital nation, one with more adept, stronger and resilient economy, society and governance. Stepping into tomorrow's digital future today.